It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote number 4. She's probably no stranger to many of you. I heard her last at ULearn 2016, and I remember tweeting, "Don't let the sorting process overtake the learning process." And I suppose she spoke at a time at ULearn right at the end, which we spoke earlier, and it was the graveyard shift, but still there was a lot of engagement from those people that were in the room with her. Rosemary is Chief Researcher at NZCEA. She was actively involved in the development of the New Zealand curriculum. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Rose Hipkins.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Thank you for inviting me to your conference. It's my absolute pleasure to come and talk to you. I tried to pick up on the theme of connections and thought this really is an urgent piece of reconnecting that we need to do. But when I was listening to Marianne this morning, I thought, gee, I should really have talked about the capabilities work. But yeah, maybe another time. Today, I want to talk about a piece, this challenge of getting the NCEA and the NZC lined up so that they work better together, which has been an ongoing challenge for us ever since we've had both of them. So, clicker, has it got an on-off button somewhere? That should be there we go. So, my summary just to start with, and I'm not going to go through all this in detail, and I realise because I've sat at the back for other keynotes that some of you right down there may not even be able to see these words particularly well, even though they're reasonably big. When you do a very busy job and you're just in the hurly-burly of that job, it's easy to forget even the immediate past and where we came from and what builds on what. So just to remind us, and this is a more detailed version of something that Marianne had with some arrows this morning, what we're building on here, what's ongoing for us, is a process that started in the 1990s with the development of the first outcomes-based curricula we had in New Zealand when Lockwood Smith was the Minister of Education. That was a significant shift from what went before it. And then we had the curriculum redevelopment in the 2000s. And NCEA also was produced in the early 2000s, and the actual New Zealand curriculum came out after NCEA. You'd have to say, if you were doing this curriculum building in an orderly process, this timeline would look a bit different to what it looks, wouldn't it? Of course, belatedly, in the way that we do patch things up, an alignment process took place. I'm going to say a wee bit more about that later, but not a lot today. So I want to start with the curriculum first, and this myth that seems still to be out there that the curriculum is for students in years 1 to 10. There are several very clear signals in the New Zealand curriculum, and there's a couple of them, that it is the curriculum for years 1 to 13. And note particularly when we're thinking about NCEA, the little bit at the bottom, excessive high stakes assessment is to be avoided. How many people listen to that, do you think? Yeah. So it is a legal requirement for your school's Board of Trustees to make sure that the curriculum up to year 13 reflects the New Zealand curriculum. Of course, we know that's easier said than done. This is the page of the curriculum that sets it in its legal context. This will have to be changed because they've been working on some of the legal framing of the curriculum. Heke Parata's been working on that, and well, who knows what will happen in a few weeks' time. I won't go there. I just want to focus on the bit in blue, the bit in the middle, and say a couple of things about this with respect to the senior secondary school. So that we've got the front part of the curriculum, which is for all students. That's what the quotes that I just showed before clearly say. But the principles, the values and the key competencies, and you know, when I was putting this slide together in the weekend, I just realised that the vision's not there. What's that about? It's not, the really important thing is not actually in the box. So I don't know why I haven't noticed that before. Anyway, but you know how easy it is to say yes, 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 that's fine. And then what does it change in the actual teaching and learning that students experience? So if this part of the curriculum is for all students and the curriculum is explicitly intended to be a curriculum for the 21st century, what changes when you take note of those things? Because not all the subjects in the senior secondary school, as we're well aware, have a natural home in the back part of the curriculum. So really the bit that applies to all is the front part of the curriculum. But there's quite a clear distinction between them. Apologies if you've heard me say this before, but I still find people who don't know this. When the curriculum was being developed, the brief for the two halves was quite different. The brief for the front part of the curriculum was to develop a visionary document for the 21st century. And I think we'll all agree that that job got done very well. But the brief for the back part was to take the results of the curriculum stock take and streamline the learning areas that were developed in the 1990s. So we didn't realise it at the time. I mean, if anybody should have seen this coming, it was me, because I was on the science group and I was also on the high level group that did the front part. And I didn't realise this was going to happen, but we inadvertently set up quite a difficult mismatch between those two halves that requires very sophisticated curriculum thinking from schools to overcome. And well, you saw when Marianne asked this morning how many people had had professional learning and curriculum design. It's quite sobering. So if I go to the alignment now and think just for a moment about that, this alignment that happened belatedly after both the curriculum and the NCEA were developed. This is data from the National Survey in 2012, just after the alignment had been done, and only 52% of the nearly 2,000 teachers who responded to the survey in that year thought that the alignment reflected the intent of their subject, their learning area. Now, what's that about? That's a bit sobering, isn't it? And of course, and more science and mathematics teachers, they were significantly more likely to disagree that it represented the intent of the curriculum. The trouble with the survey, of course, is that you can't tell what the data mean. So some people probably thought it didn't represent the intent of the curriculum because it didn't go far enough. And other people probably thought it went too far, and so went the other way. And we can't tell the difference between those just from that data. But when I think about that, and I think about the possible reasons that people might disagree, and I think about the process itself and the results of that process, then I think that when we're reconnecting the curriculum and the NCEA, which is a very tricky job to do, there are three sets of things that can get in the way. And so everything I've said up until now in the first 10 minutes or so is by way of preamble, because what I want to do now is build an argument around these three things. And the reason that I've put the brackets there is because those things aren't tacit for everybody, but I would argue that they're tacit for too many people. So they're not thinking about how beliefs that they haven't got in their conscious awareness are driving the decisions they make. Okay, so I'm going to talk about each of these three in turn, and I'll come back to this slide to signal when I'm transitioning from one to the other so we can keep ourselves on track. I want to start with purposes for learning. Now, look at this. This is the limits of my photography skills, Marianne. I can't put photography and web stuff together. This is plonk the textbook on the carpet, take photo on phone. You can see I'm no photographer. But you get the point. Who remembers this book? Okay. Either as a teacher. How many of you remember it as a teacher? Good, we've got a few teachers in the room of the same age as me, so the rest of you remember it as a student. Okay, somebody tell me when you look at this book what your first thought is. What did you just say? Yeah. You liked it? Yeah. It was huge, yeah. That's what I haven't shown very well. This blooming book was the weight of about 3 bricks. If you could imagine that. No wonder kids get bad backs. Yeah, lugging this thing around. I think this came out at the very beginning of my teaching career as a biology teacher. And it had been developed by a workshop process funded by the Ministry of Education, quite different from how curriculum gets developed now. And it was supposed to have caught sort of the cutting edge of biological thinking and knowledge at the time. It was written to be a 2-year course for Form 6 and Form 7, as they then were. But people thought, oh, this is so good, we'll have this in Form 6 and we'll have something else in Form 7. And that's what they did. So I knew as a young teacher, and I never questioned this, not for a moment, that my job was the best way I possibly could to stuff the contents of that book into the brains of the kids who sat in front of me. And that's what I did. And I was actually quite good at doing it. So the kids liked me as a teacher because they could see that that was the job that had to be done, and I did it, and we were all happy. Yeah, that's the traditional model of the 20th century model of what teaching was about, isn't it? Even though this book was actually developed to try and effect some curriculum change, it didn't really do that. So what happens when we do that and we think about NCEA, I think, is that if you bring that very deeply entrenched view that the purpose of learning is to get all the stuff and to get it as expeditiously as you can, certainly the view that I held as a young teacher, then when we come to NCEA, that's segued so quickly into credit harvesting. Yeah, and you know, you can remember at the start of NCEA, teachers motivating kids by saying, learn this, you'll get X number of credits. Learn that, you'll get X number of credits. Or the other one is, you've got to know all this stuff so that you can do this bit. And when you know this bit, you can do this bit. And it went like that. You know that thinking is still very prevalent. What's missing, if we think like that, is exactly the bit that Marianne had in the centre of her circle this morning, the why. Because if the only reason that you can say that learning and getting a whole lot of stuff into your brain is important is because you'll get some credits from it, or you'll be able to do the next course and the next course and the next course, what are we saying about the value of learning and what we're giving our young people to take out of school with them into the really complex world they're going into? Now, NCEA can feed into that sort of thinking very, very easily, but it can do other things. It doesn't have to do that, and that's my message this morning. So, from NCEA, I want to flick back to the curriculum. I'm going to keep weaving in and out of the two of them. I thought about putting the vision page up. I know you can't read these words and it doesn't matter. I was delighted to see them in your presentation yesterday, Mary Jean. This is a much neglected page of the curriculum. Now, let's see. Stand up if the staff in your school have used this page as a basis for a serious conversation about why kids are learning what they're learning. Thank you for being brave. If you teach a learning area that's in the curriculum, and I know not all of you will, can you, hand on heart, say what the words for your learning area say? You know, I took a group of Canadian teachers in the province of Alberta who are working on building a new curriculum through this page in January this year, and they were absolutely fascinated by it and by the things that are said here. So let's just look at one of them, and I'm going to turn to science for two reasons. Partly because it was my learning area. I started my career as a science and biology teacher, as some of you will know, but I particularly like this statement for two reasons. It's got a couple of very, very important signals in it. If I go back, whoops, too far, it's a bit sensitive. That little box in green there, and that box there, that's the same. Those are those words. I've just split them out to show the semantic structure of that sentence. So the sentence pivots on a so that. It doesn't say kids learn science so that they can go to university and do this or that, or so they can know all the stuff. It says they learn science so that they can be good citizens in a society in which science plays a significant role. That's a pretty powerful sort of a statement for framing the why of curriculum, isn't it? If you take it seriously and don't think it's just rhetoric. And the other reason I like it is the little words that I've underlined there. So they don't just learn the stuff, they have to learn about how science itself works. And if if science is your area of expertise too, you'll know there's an overarching but much neglected and much misunderstood nature of science strand, which is what we tackled when we did the science capabilities work that Mary-Ann mentioned this morning. We also tackled that question in this little book here, where the question that we asked ourselves was, if our kids are going out of school into a world beset with wicked problems, traversing the ground that Steve Mahari covered in his keynote yesterday morning, what is it they need to be capable of? And how do the key competencies potentially feed into that? That was the piece of futures thinking that we did in that book. And I know that a number of you in the room have read it. And one of the things that we found very clearly in all the work that we've done around the key competencies over a number of years now is that when teachers make really rich learning tasks that truly do embed the key competencies and use them to change the learning, then actually they've got dual goals in mind. They've got goals for now, immediate learning, and they've got goals for the future. A number of you will know that I've used it. Did you design this? Yeah, I saw the look on your face, Karen, and I thought Karen had something to do with this. You know, I find it deeply fascinating that a lot of the curriculum innovation that we've got happening is not being led from inside the Ministry of Education. It's being led by other government agencies, or in the case of the agribusiness example that we were listening to this morning, in a public-private partnership. That just occurred to me when I was listening to, where are you, Peter? When I was looking to Peter's amazing talk about the new agribusiness standards this morning, I thought, I want to go away and think some more about that. Why is that? But in this case, the innovation's being driven by the Transport Authority, who have a very explicit citizenship agenda in mind. They want kids to be better users of the road commons. And they'll say it as clearly and simply as that. This is a beautiful example, and there are lots more of them, because it's a unit of work that addresses a bog standard English well, maybe not, but anyway, it is an English outcome about analysing and using visual text. And it's assessed by an NCEA standard that's about that. But actually the big agenda, the why agenda that sits in the centre of those concentric circles, is about kids learning to be better citizens explicitly in the way that they use the road commons. And instead of lecturing them about that, this is what I love about this unit of work, it sort of slips the knife in, because they're analysing kids in a car aping adults in a car after they've been at the pub. And so, you can sit back and look at that and think about it, and not begin that thinking about it by feeling that you're personally being confronted. The Transport Authority is very clever in the way they think about what motivates people to change behaviours, and it makes these materials they've got very interesting. So here's a direct alignment between the curriculum and the NCEA, and the alignment is driven by two things: by the sense of high-level purpose and by the context, the rich context that's chosen for learning. Okay, so I've said this already. If you haven't seen the examples that first led us to this insight, I found yesterday there were some people who didn't know about this website, Key Competencies in Effective Pedagogy. The Ministry of Education quite often pays for pieces of work, and once they're on TKI, they think job done. And we all know that the stuff comes at us so fast it's very hard to find it all. But that was a very clear finding from this piece of work which we did about 6 years ago. So if we think about, something funny has happened there to my box on side, apologies for that. If we think about the shift, the rhetorical shift from 20th century learning to 21st century learning, we start, all the boxes have got squished on that side. We started out with just knowledge and skills. What's added to that is the sense of action competence, that your learning is for something, like Jane's argument that Marianne had up this morning, an emotional engagement, and that learning isn't just like with that sixth form textbook I had, this is the stuff, you learn it, to a more negotiated learning program that students can bring themselves to the learning. So some of our learning areas have been able to make this shift. And here I want to just go back a minute to the 1990s. Most of you will remember this, but I think that you just have to stop and step back and think about it a little bit in the big picture context. So when it was decreed that we would have outcomes-based curricula, predictably enough, if I asked you what would be the first even if you don't know, if you weren't in New Zealand at the time or you weren't involved at all, what would be the first 3 learning areas that would have a curriculum developed in the new format? English, science, maths. It actually went English, maths, science. And then somebody decided, I wasn't involved in this decision making myself, that we should have a framework. And the framework came out, the first prototype framework, little slim bluey black covered document, remember it? Came out after the science curriculum. As the decade went on, people's curriculum thinking got quite a lot smarter. When it came to health and physical education, that was a shotgun marriage par excellence, because the health educators and the PE teachers were sat down in the same room and said, make a curriculum, your one learning area. And at the time, they didn't really have anything in common. Oh, and by the way, we'll drop home economics in there because there's nowhere else for it naturally to go. So there were 3 learning areas that each were quite different from each other that had to find common ground. And the common ground they found was in socio-critical action. And that allowed the curriculum process to move forward. I know how hard it was. It looks obvious enough now, but I was there. I was actually on the writing party for that curriculum in the 1990s when such things were still relatively well funded. So that learning area made a shift in the 1990s that flowed through into the New Zealand curriculum, that flowed through into the achievement standards. Doesn't mean to say that teachers necessarily choose the achievement standards that reflect the socio-critical dimensions of the curriculum, but that subject's made a shift. And there are several others that have as well, but then some subjects have brought through traditional content-based curriculum thinking, and science, I believe, my learning area is one of these, and biology in particular, where there's been an explosion of knowledge over the last 50 or so years. The biology curriculum just makes me want to sit in a corner and cry. Because it's got so much potential to be an interesting subject, and it's weighed down with the weight of all this stuff. And it's still in the standards, even after they've been aligned, they still look like that. So, but it started in the 90s and it's carried right through. And I see now, looking back, that one of the unfortunate things that happened in the 1990s, and it only happened in science, somebody must have got their act together and realised this wasn't a good thing. Not only did they produce science in the New Zealand curriculum, they then went on and produced a specialist curriculum for biology, for chemistry, for physics. Some of you, if you taught them, will remember those little documents, which just kept those subjects siloed and kept the emphasis on the content and got in the way of people doing new sorts of curriculum thinking. Very unfortunate. So, coming back to teachers' tacit beliefs about their subject, because I need to move on to the next of my themes in a minute. This is another thing that the ministry slipped out there, in this case on Easter Thursday this year, although the work had been done over the preceding couple of years. Who knows about the RAMP reports? Wow, only a few people in the room. Yeah, RAMP, the acronym, stands for Review and Maintenance Program, and it is about the alignment of the NCEA with the NZC. The ministry commissioned us to do literature overview searches. We did 5 learning areas before they decided that they were getting essentially the same messages and they wouldn't do any more. We did science first, we did maths and stats second, health and PE was third, technology was fourth, and the learning languages was fifth. And sorry, English, social sciences and the arts, they didn't happen in those learning areas. But these literature overviews, one of the things that was really, really interesting, and it played out in different ways in the different ones, but the message was consistent right across them, was that you can look at the problems and the pedagogical challenges that come to us with the curriculum, and if you read them with a 20th century framing, you see them one way, and if you read exactly the same challenge with a 21st century framing, you see it quite a different way. So the example that I put up here is e-learning. So, you know, there's a lot of pressure on people to use more e-learning, right? You can use that for completely traditional curriculum purposes, to get more content into kids, to make the content more engaging for kids, rah. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing to do, but if that's the only thing you do, then you're missing all the other affordances of what e-learning can do for the curriculum to support knowledge work, finding out where knowledge comes from, looking at how issues are presented. You know all the different things that you can do with e-learning. So if you haven't seen those, have a look at them, because that theme is there in all of them. I need to move on now, just to leave that subject with you. But if you haven't had a chance to have a conversation with your staff about where they see the purposes for learning lying, then I really strongly encourage you, even for those teachers who don't have a natural home in that learning area structure, to start with that part of the curriculum, because the common thread running through those learning area statements is about learning for citizenship. And it's very, very clear in the way the science one's structured, in the way the technology one's structured, the social sciences one. It's not quite so clear in some of the others. I understand from people who were in the ministry at the time, it wasn't Marianne that told me this, it was someone else, that was the most contested single thing in the development process of developing that part of the curriculum. But I want to move on now to talking about course coherence, because I'm doing another literature review for the ministry at the moment, building another database, this time explicitly about NCEA research. And this is an absent presence. There's almost no research that's actually talking about coherence, not course coherence, and of course, even more challenging, program coherence, so that kids can experience some consistency over the whole of their course. I think that this is something that NCEA hasn't helped us to address very well, but when we do address it, it doesn't get in the way. It's kind of neutral here. It can go both ways. It can support traditional content thinking so that you can design a curriculum that's business as usual. And when you do that, and I'm going back to my beast of a biology textbook here, it looks like this. You do topic 1, you do topic 2, you do topic 3, you do topic 4. They're all in the same learning area. You've got a coherent course. Have you? There are other ways to think about course coherence. That's not to say, I don't want to leave you with a false impression here, you can make a coherent course, of course, within a traditional subject, depending on what you see as the purpose and how you build the connections between those topics. But if they just sit there plonk as topic 1, topic 2, topic 3 and topic 4, there is absolutely no guarantee that it'll be a coherent course. But if we look at some others that are coherent, there are other ways of thinking about it. This is just a couple of examples. If I'd known about it sooner, I could have put some slides from Peter's agribusiness course up here. The first one is a set of guidelines that have just come out. If you're not aware of them, I'm not even sure that I'll get the title exactly right. Environmental Education for Sustainability, Strategic Goals, 2017 to 2027, I think, something like that. It's strategic goals for the EE and E4S learning area for the next 10 years. Anyway, beautifully produced little booklet with some interesting examples in it. And I've just clipped one here. I know that you can't read the words there. Is there anyone from Motueka High School in the room? Yay! So this is an example of a cross-curriculum course supported by DOC, is that? Yeah, with achievement standards that come to it, but conservation and an actual real-life conservation project is what gives it coherence. Okay, it's completely different. The one on the other side, I know there's a number of people in the room who were involved in the Sport and Education project because that was in 8 secondary schools around the country. And the thing that gave that course coherence was using the context of sport in some way to motivate disengaged kids and to lift their engagement and lift their learning achievement. And out of that initiative came a lot of integrated programs which were integrated around, in some way, around using sport as a context to motivate kids. So there are different ways to think about coherence, and incidentally, if you go back to what I said before about having dual purposes for learning, you can see that that's characterised here, because these kids, yes, they're getting their NCEA credits, yes, they're doing some traditional subject learning, but they're also having a really rich and engaged experience of what it takes to be a person who cares about conservation and is developing those citizenship values for conservation. And on this side, these kids hopefully are going to be more engaged with, more involved in sport, healthier, and more likely to see themselves as successful learners than they might have been before. So there's always those dual goals in here. Okay, this is a big caveat. This is a really big caveat, and I think that this is a highly problematic thing. Sorry, I know it's terribly hot in here and it's just after lunch and this is quite a serious talk. I wonder if they could I see a few people drooping. I wonder if they could turn the aircon on. Yeah. I know I'm feeling hot myself, and I can see that a lot of you are too. Yeah. I'm thinking I should have, done something light and entertaining, but this really is a subject that we've got to engage with, I think. So despite the physical discomfort and the fact that we've just had, well, I don't know about you, but a much bigger lunch than I ever would have eaten in the middle of a busy day, try and stick with me. So if teachers are going to be able to do this sort of thinking that makes them think differently about how courses could come together, then one of the things that's very tricky about it is that they actually have to know their subject more deeply than if they're just delivering the subject in the more traditional way. And specifically, they've got to know more about what makes the discipline area tick. Now, I know that we are notorious in education for hating technical terms, jargon terms, but I'm going to give you one, and I hope it's the only one I've got in my talk. I hope I've still got a reasonably good radar for this. It's a two-word phrase that actually sums up the problem here. And I'm just going to say, I'll be honest about this. You tell me when I show you in a sec, if you've seen this phrase before, or you're sitting there thinking, oh, what does that mean? Okay, here it comes. Oh, the middle word. Put thinking after it. Epistemic thinking. Who's seen that phrase? Oh, a smattering of people in the room. That's great. Epistemic thinking is thinking about knowledge and knowing. Thinking about how we know, what makes knowledge trustworthy, what makes, if you like, to use a contemporary example, what makes real news, actual news, and fake news something that we should be wary of. That's how important it is, as if we needed reminding about that. Incidentally, I borrowed this image off a business website. So this is not something that only education is grappling with. This is something that people are grappling with in other fields of endeavour too. And I know that people don't like to think about PISA, but if you've had a look at the PISA frameworks recently, you'll see that one of the things that PISA assesses for is epistemic thinking. And so it's there already. And I believe that teachers need to be strong epistemic thinkers themselves if they're going to be able to keep the integrity of their subject area while they hack the curriculum to find new ways to put courses together. That makes sense? It's a real challenge because, when I did my degree, and I know it's rather a long time ago now, but when I was young and did my degree, I just learnt a lot of science stuff. And as I went through stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3, the stuff I learned got harder. And I think that there's still a fair element of that. A couple of years ago, I had a very humbling experience. A young friend of mine was studying genetics at university, and she was having trouble with a lab that she was doing. She hadn't passed it. And I said, I'll have a look at it with you. I'll help you. I used to teach genetics. Wrote a genetics textbook a few years ago. I feel I'm pretty good on genetics. Thought I'd be able to do this from first principles. I would have failed it miserably. Because there's this little organism there, and it says, how many spectacles does it have on the receptacle or something, and you had to know the actual answer number. It was tiny technical detail about things, and this was in a stage 2 university course. And I thought, what's that about? That's about testing your memory. It's not about anything else other than that. I didn't learn about the nature of science until I did my Master of Education. And when I did do my Master of Education, I felt the ground shift under my feet. And I went through a stage of being incredibly angry and a stage of being very sad, thinking back over my, by then, about 25 years of teaching, for the lost opportunities, for the things that I could have helped my kids learn if I'd known them myself. But all of us only know what we know. So this is a huge challenge for us, I think, because to crack it, we actually need the universities to start thinking differently about what's important for people to learn, because that's where our beginning teachers receive their subject-based education. And as far as I can see, it's still not happening, but not universally, because it's already happened in a couple of learning areas of the curriculum, and this is one of them. It's happened in history. If you look at the investigation standards in history, they are about historical thinking. That is epistemic thinking, by using that term. We should have them in the science standards because they've got an overarching nature of science strand. That should be the epistemic strand. But if you look at the equivalent inquiry standards in science, they're still just business as usual, no different from anything I would have done when I was a teacher, which I find bitterly disappointing. But I'm interested that this shift has happened in some learning areas. And actually the politics of how people manage to get those shifts is quite interesting, I think. I don't know the backstory behind this one, but no doubt there are people in the room who do. How did the history teachers manage to swing this? Yeah, yes, I know you'll know the answer, Alice. It's interesting. So, one more. Let me just talk for a minute about clearer thinking about progress, because each of these three things, I think, is a barrier. There's a significant barrier around how we think about the nature of knowledge and knowing and how that informs coherence. First of all, there's the why, like Marianne put in the centre of her circle this morning. And then there's this question of progress, and it's coming at you, believe me, as Marianne indicated this morning, because this is how people are thinking in terms of learning gains now. And on one level, it's a no-brainer. Of course we want kids to make progress. But what does that mean? And how do people understand that? Because, if I look at that traditional model, you might say it looks like this. Knows a bit of stuff, knows quite a lot of stuff, knows heaps of stuff, and some of it's really hard. Yeah? That assumption is still built into quite a few of the NCEA achievement standards, isn't it? So, are there other ways of thinking about it? I tackled this topic last year at the Science Teachers Conference because I've been really concerned moving around the country, having science teachers tell me that they're being pressured by their senior management to report kids' progress against the levels of the curriculum. And I thought, well, how do you do that? Because actually the science curriculum levels are an aggregated series of they're this. Gets a bit harder. This topic's harder than that topic. Where is the basis for progress there? There are ways of thinking about how kids progress intellectually, but they're quite unfamiliar ways of thinking about what progress looks like. This is from PISA. If you haven't looked at the PISA assessment frameworks, I know they're horizontal because they're all kids at age 15, but just imagine we could tip them this way and make them vertical, because kids at 15 are spread out right along this continuum in all the different countries, and we know that our kids are more spread out than the kids in most countries. So I just picked out cause and effect thinking. Now, I'm not suggesting by picking this that this should be one of the central intellectual qualities that we focus our effort on. It might be, it might not be. That's a conversation that we should have. But I picked it out because it's a very easy one to get your head around. So kids can describe simple causal relationships. They can explain multi-step causal relationships. You can see how from making a simple one to making a multi-step one is a significantly enhanced intellectual capacity and evidence of progress. And being able to lay out multi-step ones and explain them and perhaps manipulate them and play them differently, you can see that actually something makes progress on the way down there. That clear? That's just one little example. If you want to think about that a bit more, I turned my talk from the Science Teachers Conference last year into a series of blogs, about 7 or 8 of them. They're on our website. The image that I've just done is from that one called PISA and the progress question. But there are others there that just play out some different ways of thinking about what we mean by making progress. And if you do go to look at them, just be aware, because I checked them on the weekend just to make sure they're still there, they're listed in reverse order. So the last one's at the top, and what you've got to do is scroll down them until you get to the first of the ones that I've written, because I built them as a logical argument that could unfold over a series of weeks. So I think that we need this conversation about what we mean by making progress, and we need to find some areas where we can look at that across the curriculum, so that if we're building these new sorts of courses that have a different sense of coherence, there is something unifying that runs through the learning areas that we can look at. We could do this, but we haven't done it. And it's an unfamiliar way of thinking. In this room, I reckon we've got the expertise to do a good job at that. There's just a few small practical problems, of course, with making that come true. It's almost time to draw the threads together. So I do just want to acknowledge, because some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, it's all very well for Rose to say these things, that there are some significant barriers, and I was interested to see that Marianne did the same thing this morning. There are some perverse incentives to stop us from using the flexibility of NCEA as it's intended to be used, and I've bracketed the 85% target because that's another one of those things that just quietly happened, doesn't it? One day we had it and the next day we didn't, with very little fanfare. I presume that you all know that it has been taken off the better public service targets very quietly. I think I was out of the country at the time, but I thought, yay. Yeah. But the practice and the type of thinking about credit harvesting and credit accumulation, the perverse incentives that it set up, will take longer to dismantle than just putting a red pen through the target. And of course, we would want our kids to get the best quals they can. But we want them to be meaningful quals, not cobbled together, pressured quals to meet some artificial target. And obviously, somewhere along the line, someone realised that. I'm not going to say anything about UE. Regs are being reviewed again. They do make a significant impediment to building new models of coherence into the curriculum, because they assume the traditional model of coherence, that it resides within traditional subject silos. I think that's problematic. But at the same time, again, we do want courses to be coherent. So, you know, these things are tricky, and finding our way through them is quite hard. Parental expectations, I've heard that raised in several workshops, and I think one of the significant oversights when the NCEA was first developed was that there wasn't a systematic, targeted communications program around it. Of course, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it would have been really helpful if we'd had something like that, I think. Subject competition in the school, I've heard that come up too. Yeah, will people choose my course? If I have fewer credits, kids will just go to the classes with more. It can be a significant factor, but again, what's driving that, if we go back to the purposes, is that the value in the learning is the credits you get for the learning, not the insights about how the world works that you get from the learning, which is what the high-level vision of the curriculum says it should be. And the challenges interact with each other. So if you haven't got a model of progress other than getting more and harder stuff, and if you do not have that thinking about the nature of your subject that can let you do some of that more creative curriculum thinking without feeling that you are giving away what you hold dear and precious in your subject, and if there are accountability pressures coming at you or pressures for reporting progress in a different way, then the safe haven is the traditional curriculum thinking. So those things actually act to reinforce each other, which makes them difficult to tackle in one way, but in another way means you can start anywhere with any one of these things to unstitch them and pull them apart, and you've got a reasonable chance of being successful whichever one you start with, because they interact. Because if you start with one, it'll bring the others up. So if we think about the alignment between NCEA and the New Zealand curriculum, what we've got in New Zealand, and we need to treasure it, we know what the problems are, but you know, I'm incredibly lucky in my job that I get to move around the world and see what curriculum and assessment looks like in other countries. And people are always intensely interested in what we're doing here in New Zealand. We've got an endlessly flexible curriculum because it's a framework, right? We've got an endlessly flexible NCEA system because it's a framework. And there are some constraints around both of those, but there are also not the constraints that there are when you live in a country that has a prescription, exams. And lots of countries are still like that. I was in Australia towards the end of last year, and I heard someone from England describing their curriculum and assessment system as hurtling backwards into the 19th century. And I felt so sad because I read the Times Educational Supplement most weeks, and you can see that dynamic and how that's happening. So I know it's a cliche. I can hear John Clark, isn't it, aka Fred Dagg. We don't know how lucky we are, but we really are. We do have that flexibility. And internal assessment potentially allows so many other ways to collect evidence. It doesn't have to be written evidence, so that really what you're assessing is kids' literacy levels. But interestingly enough, in the work that I'm doing for the ministry at the moment, that's another gap in the research literature. People writing about innovative forms of assessment doesn't seem to be something that people are systematically documenting and writing up, even though I know a lot of people will be doing it. I think some of these problems that sit deeply embedded in practice, people know but nobody thinks to catch in a formalised way. I'll just throw that little challenge out to you, because I know that your day jobs are very busy, but if we're knowledge sharing, I think it's important we do something about that. Some subjects, mainly in the arts, are moving away from this focus that learning is something that only happens for individuals and goes into individual brains. I know that this one causes difficulties in NZQA, but if they can get their head round it in the arts, they can get their head round it in other learning areas, I reckon. And when you think about, if you go back to what Steve Mahari was talking about, and that the knowledge work that's done in the world today is done collaboratively, then why shouldn't kids be doing collaborative knowledge work too? It embeds some very old-fashioned assumptions about where learning happens and where the evidence of learning resides. If it's not in your individual brain, you haven't learned it. That's that old line-up assumption. And achievement standards in a few of the subjects have gone more to that enactment. I think about the social action standards in the social sciences and the socio-critical standards in the PE curriculum, the performance standards in the arts. Some of the, but not the core subjects, you'll notice, not so much. A wee bit in English perhaps, but certainly not in maths and science. So these shifts are happening, but it's how we get them spread more across the curriculum and purposefully embedded into coherent courses of learning for every student. So here's what I think we need to do. I think we definitely can leverage this impetus for integrated assessment. I was really interested that NZQA came to the party and helped the sport and education teams develop their integrated courses. Listening to Peter this morning, they're obviously coming to the party on the agribusiness courses and the way that theirs are being supported. Let's keep that impetus going. Let's get that happening in more learning areas. That's something that the ones in purple are things that you can start in your individual schools, I think. It's entirely possible to eliminate some of the perverse incentives in your school. Another, I'm not sure that I had it on there, is tagging teachers' kids' NCEA performance to their appraisal. That creates perverse incentives, if you like, in the same way as the 85% target did. You could eliminate competition between subjects where they get into this credit inflation. I'll see your credit number and raise it. Come to my course, you'll get 40. That sort of thinking. The senior management team of the school can certainly scuttle that one quite quickly, thinking about whether you have level 1. And who needs level 1? Some schools are going there, working very bravely with that. So there's quite a lot you can do at the individual school level. But these are the things that I think we need to do at the system-wide level that you can't achieve unilaterally on your own. The things in green, I think we need robust models of progress, and I think that we need a serious conversation about that. That's a coordinated conversation across subjects that shifts the ground of that conversation. Now, when you need a huge conversation like that, I think that you need for it to be supported and structured at a system level. But you could lobby for it, because if it happens ad hoc, it'll happen better in some pockets than in others. That's the history of our ad hoc development and alignment of the curriculum in the NCEA. We can work on building teachers' epistemic awareness, but again, we need the courses and the resources to do that. So while there's some things that you can do at school, I think that's a system-wide problem. And I think it's a great shame that after the scholarship crisis, the moderation processes for NCEA turned away from being an opportunity for professional learning to being about accountability. I think we could lobby to reverse that emphasis so that there's been some shift back, like the best practice workshops is an example that springs to mind, but I think we could go further in recalibrating moderation so that it's a learning opportunity, because the assumption seemed to be that we only needed the learning opportunity to learn about the standards. But if the learning is ongoing learning about the relationship, about how NCEA expresses and assesses the curriculum, then it's a never-ending conversation, and we all need to keep learning in that space, I believe. So there are some things that you could lobby for and some things that you can immediately do. It's a huge program of work. It's incredibly complex, but be heartened by the fact that we are on this pathway in a way that other countries are only just beginning to engage with it, and states and countries that have statewide systems are only just beginning to grapple with and engage with. So all credit to all of you who wrestle with this, who contribute to the developments, who keep our system moving forward. Hopefully I've been able to give you a few more ideas to feed into that work. And yeah, kia kaha. Thank you.